It is such a pleasure to be speaking to you today about such a hugely important and under-discussed topic. Every day, we are bombarded with information about how to live longer, healthier, happier lives. Cut your sugar, get your exercise, stop smoking, eat your vegetables, take supplements, don't stress, go to sleep. But we're here today to consider a fundamental health behaviour I believe that we're missing: arts. This isn't as radical as it might at first seem. In fact, if we look back across history, the arts are found in the early writings of every ancient medical tradition. As just three examples, the Greek philosopher Aristotle argued that theatre could restore balance to the heart. Persian philosopher Ibn Sina referred to the arts 150 times in his Encyclopedia of Medicine. And the indigenous Indian medical system of Ayurveda promoted the use of soft sounds and pleasant sights to aid in digestion. But it is quite a radical rethink for modern Western medicine. Because while we've all become accustomed to hearing about the value of creative arts therapies in the management and treatment of mental and physical illnesses, conceptualizing them as a health behavior involves radically expanding this viewpoint and thinking about the impact that the arts have not just in illness, but in health, considering how they might be a human behaviour that has intrinsic health benefits, whether we're participating for leisure, as part of work, education, religion, or community. So, what is the evidence for this expanded perspective, for considering the arts as a health behaviour? Back in 2017, I began collaborating with the World Health Organization, and one of our first projects together was publishing an evidence synthesis review summarizing the findings from over 3,000 scientific studies. This is, in fact, just 1/10 of the estimated overall evidence base, but it highlighted this dual role of the arts, both in the management and treatment of illness, as well as in the wider prevention of illness and promotion of good health and well-being. Underlying this prevention and promotion evidence base is a field called epidemiology, which is my day-to-day work. Through the use of vast data sets that follow up tens of thousands of individuals across their entire lives, we're able to track how organic behaviours like participating in or observing art, just as part of our normal day-to-day, relate to long-term health outcomes. In studies involving over 16 countries to date and over 250,000 participants, we've demonstrated that arts engagement is related over time to lower subsequent rates of depression and higher self-reported health, happiness, and life satisfaction. Now, naturally, a question that occurs when thinking about this is it actually the arts having these effects, or is it simply that people who engage in the arts happen to be healthier, wealthier, better educated, different sociodemographically, or maybe they're the people who simply have better social networks or engage in other healthy behaviours? But epidemiology is a statistical discipline, and it involves constructing rich statistical models that take account of all of these factors and many more things. And what we find is that even when we've run these models, we still see this independent relationship between arts engagement and subsequent better health and well-being. Let me break this down a little bit. In some analyses, we've looked at older adults who have no depression and no history of depression, and we've then followed them up over the next 10 years. What we found in these analyses is there's a dose-response relationship, so the more people engage in arts and cultural activities, the lower the odds of them developing depression over that following decade. In fact, even when we've taken account of those confounders I've mentioned, the people who are regularly engaged more than once a month in arts and culture have half the odds of developing depression compared to people who never engage. We've even used very robust statistical methods in this, which enable us to imagine randomized control trials that wouldn't be feasible or ethical in real life, but that we can attempt to emulate using cohort data. This is achieved by matching people who regularly engage in the arts with people who don't regularly engage, but who are very similar on all their other characteristics. These analyses have shown the same thing, that people who are regularly engaged in the arts still have a lower odds of developing depression over the following decade. In fact, we've seen really diverse health benefits when people engage regularly in the arts, including a reduced incidence rate of chronic pain, slower development of frailty, better preservation of cognition as people get older, and even a longer time free from dementia, and, most excitingly of all, a longer lifespan. Some of these effect sizes are the same as those that we see for other health behaviours like exercise, underlining why it's so important to be having these conversations about rethinking the arts as a health behaviour. So why is it that we see such tangible and diverse effects of the arts on our health, just from regular day-to-day engagements? Think of the arts as comprising various ingredients that are beneficial to health, some of which are found in other behaviours like physical activity, cognitive stimulation, and social interaction. But there are also some ingredients that are particularly strongly expressed in the arts, like multisensory stimulation, creativity, aesthetics, and imagination. These ingredients all activate various mechanisms that link to health outcomes, psychological, biological, social, and behavioural processes. Let's walk through a few of these mechanisms, as they're really key to how we think about and understand the health benefits of the arts. At a simple level, the arts help us to feel happy. When we engage in the arts, we activate a host of regions right at the heart of our brains, like the amygdala, nucleus accumbens, and parts of the striatum that are crucial to our pleasure response. Specifically, the arts activate a reward pathway called the dopaminergic mesolimbic system, and this leads to the nucleus accumbens being flooded with a hormone and neurotransmitter called dopamine, which gives us feelings of happiness. We used to think that this just happened at the peak moments in arts experiences, like musical climaxes or the denouement stories. But we now know that it also happens in anticipation of these moments. And we don't just see it in temporal art forms like songs and stories, but also in static artworks that might surprise us the more we look. Essentially, by playing on our expectations, providing repeated moments of tension and release, the arts help to provide repeated doses of dopamine, making us to feel happy. But the arts aren't always about happiness. Plenty of arts experiences are sad, scary, and shocking. But actually, these are also good for us. While we might strive constantly to minimize negative emotions in our real lives, somehow we're drawn to them in our arts engagements, an effect known as the tragedy paradox. The reason for this is that even though the arts-induced emotions that we experience are real, we know that they're artificial. They're the result of the encounter with art, rather than an encounter with a true, sad, or distressing event. By experiencing negative emotions in arts, we can therefore contemplate our own responses and practice how to manage them, but without having to face the real-life consequences. And this builds our abilities to predict how to respond to real-life scenarios, an effect called predictive coding. It also, paradoxically, makes us feel happy. In fact, if you take an image of someone's brain while they're doing art, you can see the specific parts of the brain that are crucial to regulating our emotions being activated. And this is because when we engage in the arts, we essentially provide our brains with a toolbox of different emotion regulation strategies. When we do arts, it's a chance for us to avoid things that might be causing us stress in our lives through distraction, suppression, or detachment. And sometimes it's even a chance for us to approach them differently, to accept what might be going on, to vent or discharge our emotions, or to reappraise events in our lives. In other words, the arts not only help us to understand our emotions better, but also to manage them, two of the most fundamental skills that we need in life. The arts also help us to fulfill core psychological needs. Humans are driven by a need to grow and gain fulfillment, and engaging in the arts can be a powerful way of meeting this need. They can also help us to feel a sense of competence, autonomy, relatedness, coherence, meaning in life, and purpose. Without these needs, we experience increased risks of depression, anxiety, and stress, but these needs can help to buffer some of those negative experiences in our lives. The arts also feed our sense of self in two seemingly paradoxical ways. First, they help us to focus on ourselves, enhancing the functional connectivity between three brain regions that are involved in mindfulness. But from the opposite angle, the arts also help us to focus away from ourselves, building positive identities as artists and creative individuals. And these identities can provide a sense of belonging and counteract against other negative identities or stigma. The arts also bring many social benefits. In what has been dubbed the icebreaker effect, singing or dancing with other people makes us feel emotionally closer than doing other activities like chatting or exercising in the gym. And mechanistically, one of the reasons this happens is, we believe, through singing leading to increases in endorphins, neurotransmitters that we encounter in relation to pain that also promote bonding. We see this social bonding through the arts manifested across cultures, including in mother-infant singing, in increased cohesion between communities through performances like the Maori Haka, and even in people falling in love through activities like dance. Through the arts, we have a chance to bond and connect with other humans and help to strengthen feelings of cohesiveness within our societies. Behaviourally, people who engage in the arts, like reading for pleasure, are also likely to engage in other health promoting behaviours. For example, amongst young people, we see associations with reading for pleasure and subsequently being less likely to smoke and more likely to eat vegetables. Amongst primary school children, we see that those who show greater creativity engaging in arts activities are also less likely to develop behavioural problems or even engage in behaviours that could harm others. Partly this is due to what's called spillover effects. The health promoting effects of the arts can act as an impetus for us to engage in other health promoting behaviours. But there are also other key behavioural mechanisms at play. When we engage in the arts and increase our creativity, that can help us with things like problem solving, self-control. When we do arts activities that help us to understand perspectives of other people, we activate something called theory of mind, the ability to put ourselves in other people's shoes. All of this can support processes like empathy. Biologically, the arts are also effective manipulators of our stress response systems. When we engage in arts activities, whether we're participating or watching, there are two key biological systems that are affected, one of which is our autonomic nervous system, which sends messages via nerves to change the activities of our organs depending on whether we feel aroused or relaxed. And the other is our endocrine system, which releases various hormones into our blood via hormone glands, which have effects on our stress response. When we're participating in relaxing arts experiences, we can see consistent patterns of reductions in cardiovascular measures like blood pressure as a result of our autonomic nervous system activity, as well as reductions in stress hormones like cortisol as a result of that endocrine system activity. And we see this both over individual 20-minute bursts of arts engagement and over longer time spans. People who engage regularly in the arts over weeks and months have lower biological stress profiles. And these aren't the only biological systems affected. Diverse studies now demonstrate the effects of the arts on our immune health, with short-term arts engagement related to temporary increases in immune activity, short-term boosts in the activity of different chemical messengers and cells, and longer-term engagement related to reductions in inflammatory immune responses. Inflammation is linked to every mental and physical health problem, but through arts engagement we can see reductions in inflammatory profiles, which is associated with a reduced risk of those problems. We also see that people with the most diverse and frequent patterns of arts and cultural engagement have better metabolic profiles, like lower levels of blood fats called triglycerides, and better balance of their blood sugars. Delving deeper into neuroscience, creative experiences across the lifespan are related to enhanced connectivity between different brain regions. Some of these are involved with the acquisition of early skills like language development, and others are related to different skills and activities as our brains age, In fact, we even see enhanced connectivity in brain regions that are vulnerable to age as a result of arts experiences, with dancers, musicians, and visual artists actually showing delayed brain aging, brains that are younger than their chronological age. This is critical to some of the processes that I mentioned earlier, like the arts being related to longer-term preservation of cognition. In fact, people who engage more regularly with cultural events, like going to live music, theatre, dance performances, museums, and galleries, show physiological patterns across multiple organ systems that indicate slower physiological aging than people who don't engage in the arts. Culture vultures who engage particularly regularly are actually around 4 years biologically younger than people who never engage, and they actually show patterns of slower aging biologically over the next decades. This biological delay in aging is even evident at the deepest biological levels. People who engage more frequently in arts, culture, and heritage activities show different patterns of gene expression in their DNA, known as epigenetic clocks, indicating what's called a lower epigenetic age. This is a key predictor of both a longer remaining lifespan and health span. These are just a tiny taster of the extremely diverse mechanisms that the arts activate, some more of which I illustrate here. The arts help to increase happiness and its associated neurotransmitters, fulfill our fundamental human needs, give us peak moments of joy and euphoria, build our well-being and resilience, prevent and manage symptoms of depression and anxiety, help us to understand and regulate our emotions, broaden the ways that we think and act, build our sense of identity, support our cognitive development, enhance learning, build the cognitive reserve in our brains, enhance processes of neuroplasticity. They can also help us to entrain or synchronize our movements for exercise, downregulate our psychobiological stress response systems, reduce pain, lower medication needs, and even improve the outcomes from surgeries and hospital treatments. The arts can help provide perspectives on life choices, improve our capabilities, opportunities, and motivations to change our behaviors, even influencing those health behaviors. They can enhance our social networks and connections. They can help us to be more tolerant, empathetic, and altruistic. They can reduce our engagement in harmful behaviors, either towards ourselves or others. And they also support heart and lung function, boost immune activity, influence gene expression. They help us to maintain physical functioning, and they also slow biological aging, extending both our health span and even, we believe from early evidence, our lifespan. Can you imagine if a drug had the same catalogue of benefits as the arts? We'd be telling everyone about it, fighting to get our hands on it, paying premium prices, taking it religiously every day, investing trillions in further research and development. It would be revered as our elixir. Unfortunately, the reality is quite different. I want you to think, how many minutes did you spend on doing arts activities yesterday? Count anything where the art was the primary thing that you were doing. So discount putting arts or music on in your headphones and then zoning out, or just walking past a statue in your park. Instead, only count those things where the arts were the primary focus of your attention. If you said literally any number other than 0, you should probably be congratulating yourself. Because if you go outside right now and start asking adults on the street if they did any arts activities yesterday, in high-income countries, just 5% of them, that's 1 in 20, will say yes. If we look at reading, just 1 in 6 people will say yes. And this figure has been declining steadily for the past 40 years. If we compare this to other behaviours of those same adults, 57% will say that they ate vegetables yesterday, and 40% will say that they managed their recommended physical activity. So the sad reality is that we as societies are becoming increasingly disengaged from the arts. When we do participate, it's in the background, music playlists that we plug into and zone out from. We're lapsing into a state of artistic passivity. It's 80 years since the United Nations declared access to the arts a human right. But arts engagement in many societies is heavily imbalanced. We see wild variation between countries in whether children have any access to the arts in schools. And in many countries, we see again that the wealthiest and healthiest are those that get to participate the most. We as societies appear to have taken this ubiquitous human behaviour and commodified it, turned it into a luxury. Even in countries where the arts are embedded into ritual or religion, we actually still see that many traditional and indigenous arts practices are disappearing. What's more, every time we face periods of austerity, funding for the arts is the first thing to go. Across many countries, particularly in Europe and North America, we've seen the steady decline in arts funding. We've seen arts being less available within schools, arts budgets being cut, and arts venues being closed. We haven't considered the health ramifications of these decisions. Every pound that we cut in investment in the arts does have consequences for health and, as a result, for healthcare systems. But I think there is hope, so here is why and what I think we can be doing about this. In many countries around the world, we are seeing some incredible initiatives developing, from affordable book schemes in Egypt, to arts coupons for low-income families in Brazil, to 1% of all infrastructure spends in Japan being ring-fenced to be spent on the arts. Initiatives like these might be small in scale or narrow in scope initially, but they are showing that it is possible to remove barriers to access and to bring the arts to everyone. Imagine if we could develop and scale these and actually achieve the UN human right of art for all. In over 40 countries around the world, we're now seeing social prescribing initiatives that are providing arts and other community activities on prescription to patients. Schemes like this are still in pilot stages in many countries, so there are big things that need to be worked out, like sustainable funding models and appropriate training and support for artists. But we're seeing some really exciting developments in the research already. In the UK, we now have a national programme of social prescribing, and analyses that my team and I have been leading looking at people's medical records are showing that in the first 4 years since this scheme launched in 2019, there were over 5.5 million referrals to this scheme. And excitingly, we're seeing that year on year, more and more of these referrals are coming from areas with higher levels of deprivation, from people who are showing a higher burden of disease and a greater social and economic need for the referrals. Again, looking at administrative data, we're actually finding that in the first few months, we see major improvements in people's well-being once they've been referred into the scheme. And we're able to estimate what the return on investment for social prescribing is by looking at what the monetized value of these well-being improvements is worth. Using values that our government puts into a Treasury Green Book, we can estimate that the increases in life satisfaction over the first few months of social prescribing alone are worth over £4,000 per person. And relative to the cost of social prescribing, this is yielding a return of £9 for every £1 that is invested, just in wellbeing benefits alone. Wellbeing isn't the only outcome that's improved through engagement in social prescribing either. A large number of local evaluations have now demonstrated reductions in health service utilisation and related healthcare costs, with broader social return on investment analyses suggesting similar positive economic value to investing in social prescribing. These findings on the benefits are being corroborated in clinical trials as well. In one study in Greece, which I've collaborated on, we've run a randomised trial involving adults with diagnoses of severe mental illness, and we've found that over 12 weeks of referral into arts on prescription, there are marked improvements in both depression and anxiety symptoms in people who are allocated to arts as well as care as usual, compared to people who just receive care as usual. In another programme that we've been studying in the UK and that has now also been implemented in 8 other countries around the world, we've been referring patients with postnatal depression through to community singing groups for mums to attend with their babies. In a series of randomized controlled trials, we've now demonstrated that the singing classes lead to faster recovery from postnatal depression symptoms and longer and better maintenance of this recovery over the next 6 months. We've identified that referrals into this scheme are actually more cost effective than some of the other interventions that are currently offered for postnatal depression. With our calculations on this, using the recommended approach that our National Institute for Clinical Excellence provides, demonstrating that there is an 82 to 93% probability of this intervention being cost effective within our National Health Service. Schemes like this are providing this corroboration that prescribing arts activities to people through schemes like social prescribing can be a really valuable avenue. Imagine if we could have schemes like this available in every country around the world. Yes, these initiatives do require investment, and we're all aware that budgets are tight. But engaging people more in the arts is also financially worthwhile. Not only are we seeing increasing social return on investment analyses being undertaken for specific arts programs and arts prescribing programs, but working with health economists commissioned by the UK government, I have been working with colleagues to monetize the health benefits of arts engagement as part of day-to-day life. We've been considering how this everyday engagement influences individual well-being, influences health and social care needs and associated costs, and even how it might enhance our productivity, our ability to undertake paid or informal labour or volunteering. In the UK, amongst working age adults alone, current levels of arts engagement have a societal-wide health economic benefit that has now been valued at £18.6 billion per year. Imagine if we could double the number of people engaging. Already, we're also seeing the most incredible mobilisation of stakeholders who are working to achieve all of these different policy aims. And there is an incredible proliferation of government policy reports on arts and health from around the world. My team and I have counted over 170 of these to date. The WHO report that I mentioned has now been downloaded over 250,000 times, making it the 4th most downloaded WHO publication ever. It's been translated into multiple languages and led to new reports from UNESCO, the OECD and the European Commission. It was even named the Global Aesthetic Achievement of 2019. At UCL, I have the great honour of my research group being designated the first ever WHO Collaborating Centre on Arts and Health. And we're now working with remarkable partners like the WHO Jameel Arts and Health Lab. Together, we have a roadmap ahead of us that involves new technical reports, briefings, and even the potential for a new international technical resolution acknowledging the arts as a health behaviour. But work like this is going to require really coordinated efforts between those within the arts world, within health and social care, and those people in policy, funding, education, research, faith, and people with lived experiences. Collaboration between all of these different stakeholders is what is going to be critical to moving all of this work forwards. Essentially, what we're arguing for here is a reconceptualization of the arts as a fundamental health behaviour that influences individual health and well-being through the myriad mechanisms I've proposed here today, but that also has wider reaching influence on the structural and social fabric of our societies. Is this vision too ambitious, too premature? In science, we always need more research, more data, more answers, and it's vitally important still to be cautious. The arts are definitely not a panacea. They can at times do far more harm than good, and we have to be wary of hype, sensationalism, and plenty of poor quality science. But in practice and policy, we also have to act on what's currently available to us and do the things that we think will help people the most. If we wait, we're not just pressing pause, we're also sitting on the sidelines and potentially watching as arts engagement dwindles and financial investment in arts within communities evaporates. That's why I believe our window of opportunity to effect change is now. Is that every health behaviour we're now familiar with has had what I call a seatbelt moment, a time when suddenly everyone woke up and realised how important that behaviour is to our health. Despite the ongoing efforts of scientists and lobbyists, it wasn't until the 1990s that seatbelts in cars became mandatory across most countries. The first dietary guidelines for Americans weren't published till the late 1970s. Skepticism that exercise was good for us was still raging well into the 1980s, and smoking bans have only really started coming into play since the millennium. These are all behaviours that many of us just take for granted now in acknowledging their health benefits. But they're behaviours that had to fight, that had to shout about their evidence base and talk very loudly with different collaborators and stakeholders in order for that seatbelt moment to happen. I'm proposing today that the arts are way overdue their seatbelt moments. Really, we should be flipping things around, not arguing that we all need more arts in our lives, but instead worrying about the impact of not having regular arts engagements. If we turn around the findings that I've presented today the other way, art deprivation is linked with increased risk of depression, dementia, chronic pain, harmful behaviours, physical decline, even premature mortality. And by not ensuring equal access to the arts for everyone, by allowing them to be unequally distributed within and between societies, we're actually exacerbating health inequalities. We're being less ethical by not allowing people and encouraging people to engage more in the arts. And that is why I'm so delighted to announce my new book, Art Cure. In it, with the luxury of not just 30 minutes, but 300 pages, I delve even deeper into the science for public health and also for illness. I give case studies and inspiring stories of arts programs that are putting this evidence into practice. And I consider what this evidence base collectively tells us and where we can all go from here. I truly believe that arts and health is now at its seatbelt moment, and I'm so excited to continue the discussions with all of you through ArtCure and hopefully through continued collaboration. I hope that ArtCure proves a valuable resource to all of you in your work, and I look forward to continuing the conversations with you. Thank you.